I would suggest that what happens in 2020 and 22 is not likely to happen without Beijing's sort of nod of approval. And what Beijing treasures above all, and particularly as the region begins to get destabilized somewhat, is stability in places like Macau. And stability would suggest that the three concessions and the three sub-concessions, when they tell their investors that they are confident that they're going to have their concessions renewed, I think there's a lot of substance to that. I think that if they take out any individual concession, especially an American sub-concession, there is actually a lot of potential for destabilization of the market and of the politics of the market. And I just, especially when you consider that the owners, the bosses of these, particularly two American companies, are prepared to not just praise China, but praise China's political system, I don't see it happening.
And to add on to that a little bit is that these companies aren't strictly, all of them actually at this point aren't strictly, American or Chinese. They're all public companies that are listed in Hong Kong, and they all have variety of they have majority interests. I think almost in every case, but they do have minority interests that could be owned by, a variety of different, Chinese nationals, Hong Kong citizens, Americans, etc. And I think that was part of everyone's plan to sort of broaden out the ownership of the various companies.
I just want to make one additional comment about that. The law will need to be changed before the renewal process goes ahead. The reason for that is that the existing three sub-concessions are in fact nothing of the sort. They're concessions, but they're private contracts at the moment, not public contracts. Now, one of the implications of that is, for MGM in particular, is that it has a concession 2 years shorter in duration than the other sub-concessionaires. And that's because the SJM concession itself expires 2 years earlier. So there needs to be a decoupling of the sub-concession principle so that it's clear that they're all concessions and all on equal footing when it comes to the application of term of renewal, except for SJM, which may continue to have that 2 year shortfall. The reason it had a 2 year difference was, as you may recall, STDM was the incumbent monopoly operator. So in effect they had the infrastructure and the properties available to go when their concession was granted on March 31, 2002.
Are there any specific legal rights or obligations that separate today, like, the concessions and the sub-concessions?
No. They're mirror image provisions. The essential difference is there are no cross defaults or anything of the sort. They're standalone concessions. They split the investment commitment in half. So the original commitment was 8 billion MOP. They split that in two. And as we all know, everyone has spent considerably in excess of their initial investment commitment. So it's an accident of history, I guess, that these things still are considered to be sub-concessions. As I said, they're no such thing. I'd also just want to address the point of whether there will be additional concessions. I think the Secretary for Economy and Finance has been quoted as saying that there would only be 6 concessions. I don't believe that's what he actually said. I think that the matter might still be under consideration. However, if you think about it, it would be extremely difficult to grant additional concessions without undergoing a full tender process. And the reason for that is that there are so many people who have an interest in the industry, who may also have the affiliations and connections to argue that they should in fact be granted a concession, that it would become impossible to make a decision. Certainly one that would be acceptable to all interested parties. No problem so far, because what we've had is effectively a group of very strong operators, internationally the best operators in their particular class, I'm sure. So it's not as though there's anyone who's not here now who should be here. There may be people with aspirations to be here, but not who should be here. And of course you've got the local participation as well through Galaxy and through SJM. So I agree with the panel's comment that it will probably not be much more than a routine exercise, but it does bear speculating a little bit about what sort of terms renewal will be affected on. Because if you think about it, each of these companies has already invested multiples of their initial commitment. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for a government that already has very significant fiscal reserves to be asking them to invest further. Certainly not in Macau, because there is nowhere to invest in Macau unless you start a process of urban renewal. So maybe the answer is they should invest in Hongqing, for example. I'm speculating, I don't have any particular insight, but that could well be the next phase of development for Macau.
Let me ask you a question. Is there any chance they would allow legalized gaming in another part of China and have the same operators make investments there?
Theoretically, there's always a chance, but I'd say the likelihood of that is almost zero. There was talk some time ago of various places like Hainan Island being centres for possible resort development. I think that's been comprehensively canned, and I just don't think there's an interest at the moment in trying to establish anything on the mainland. The nice thing about Macau is that while it's politically part of China, administratively it's not, and that's the principle of the basic law. So it's convenient in the sense that people can still be in China, but they're in a